Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Bleav in Big Ten. I'm Tom Hannafin from the State of State podcast, a Penn State football show with Justin King. He is Rhett Lewis from the Big Ten Network and NFL Network, former Indiana Hoosier great wide receiver. You can only imagine which game we're going to touch on first here as we look back on.
Well, it's chronological.
We'll look at chronologically is the excuse we'll give. We're going to look back at the first round of the college football playoff as it pertains specifically to the Big Ten teams that competed on Friday and Saturday. There's a lot to get to. Obviously, the first round had a lot of very polarizing reactions. Some, basically went shock for the most part. Yeah, a lot of talk over who deserves to be where, all that fun stuff. So we're going to get into that here on Bleav in Big Ten, which is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live, provides you with constant real-time odds and action and the ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, especially the college football playoff and bowl season, plus the NBA, college basketball, the NHL, and even UFC. Head to betonline.ag today and don't forget to use our promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bleav in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. I want to first of all thank Elijah Surratt, Indiana Hoosiers wide receiver, and the legend, Notre Dame legend, football legend, period, Joe Theismann, coming on Bleav in Big Ten last week to kind of get us primed.
What fun.
The first round weekend. What an honor that was to have both of them on the show. And also a little look ahead specifically at the first round matchup. As you mentioned, we're going to go in chronological order from Friday night into Saturday. So not to rub this in, Rhett, but Indiana versus Notre Dame, as Sean McDonough called it on the broadcast, was a bit of a dud. I think the final score, 27-17, really doesn't tell the entire story of how much Notre Dame controlled this game. What was your biggest takeaway from that game?
That it's really hard to win on the road in the new college football playoff.
Yep.
I think that should be something we take away from this game in all four games, in fact. I mean, look, it was an incredible environment. It was my first time to South Bend. I was up there at Notre Dame Stadium for it. Really cool to see. Indiana fans were well represented. And I don't know what it was like down in Austin, but I imagine it wasn't very well represented for SMU fans up at Happy Valley. Harder to get to, certainly. But Indiana fans showed up. Tennessee fans certainly showed up in Columbus. I think the followings, the fans, and the just kind of overall enthusiasm and excitement for these games was definitely a takeaway. Now, look, the reactions on social media certainly, which started, and we'll get into the X's and O's of this game for IU and Notre Dame, but like, this is the overall, the overall takeaways where you were either incredibly proud of your team's run, or you were a fan for one of the teams that were left out of the 12-team field and still feel like you're slighted. The vitriol that was spun Indiana's way after that game was unlike anything I've seen on social media in a long time. And as it turns out, it was the closest margin of defeat of any of the four games.
Yes.
So
an average of 19.3 in the first round.
Right. Now, look, let's settle this out here for a minute. Because anybody out there, Lane Kiffin included, Kirk Herbstreit included, who's saying that these teams did not belong in the field and that teams like Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina did and would have put up a better fight, is the biggest load of you-know-what that I have ever heard. Wins matter, sure. Losses matter too. By their logic, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, and Kentucky should have been in the playoff instead. Okay, teams that all of those three lost SEC teams we're talking about lost to. So I don't care if you went on, or if you went and you beat Georgia or you beat whomever, you couldn't take care of business against teams that you were supposed to beat. And by that logic, you do not deserve to be in the playoff. Or if you're saying Indiana did not deserve to be in the playoff, then by that same token, you are essentially crossing your team off the list as well, because you cannot sit here and say that wins by Indiana didn't matter and then losses by your team to teams that you're making fun of Indiana for beating didn't matter. You can't have it both ways, folks. So the easy entrance into the playoff, take care of business. If Ole Miss wins 11 games, and they don't lose to Florida and Kentucky, they're in the playoff. If Alabama simply didn't lose one of the 2 games to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt, mediocre teams, if not below average, they're in the playoff. That's not Indiana's fault. That's not SMU's fault, okay? And that's not Tennessee's fault, even though Tennessee is part of this argument as well.
Yeah. Let's not forget about them.
Wait,
yeah.
Tom, hold on a second. Did you just hold on? Oh no, wait. I thought for a second I heard SEC fans again showing up and talking about all the teams that didn't belong in the playoff. But you know what? It's actually been kind of silent since Tennessee took the field. Yeah. I don't know why. We haven't. Have you heard anything since
Not
then?
As much. No, it just doesn't mean as much.
Just doesn't mean as much when you lose 42-17. Okay, sorry. So that was the
no. To piggyback on what you're saying, I think there's 2 different conversations that are being had in regard to this playoff. There's who's most deserving. Do you win the games you're supposed to win? Margin of victory, strength of opponent. All those things are very important. I Bleav in the meritocracy of this system. And then there's the separate conversation of who's the most credible competition you can put in there. And those are selective arguments. It depends on wherever your team is, really. Can you sit there and say that Alabama on their best day probably could have put up a better fight against Notre Dame? That's that eye test thing that I know you hate, but people will go.
Why? Because they lost to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt? What gives you any feeling that they could then go out there and play a much better team in Notre Dame?
Right. If your data point is the Georgia game, for instance, for Alabama, then it's like, okay, I understand what you're driving at, but the idea is to maintain consistency and improve and evolve as a team as the season goes on. So I think there's 2 different conversations being had: deserving versus credible. And I think that's where the Ole Misses, the South Carolinas, the Alabamas of the world are attempting to throw their weight around and saying, hey, like, we feel that if we fielded our team, regardless of record, our team would beat your team. Our personnel is better than your personnel.
You know what that's like, Tom? Do you know what that's like? That's like what's that thing we use to evaluate high school players? The star system. That's as bogus and arbitrary as planning a 5-star rating on a high schooler, and Alabama, Ole Miss, out there recruiting that player because, he looks good against a bunch of other 16-year-olds and he's big, strong, and fast. And you're thinking he's now going to be the second coming, of whomever and be this incredible college player. And he ends up being a bust. That's what you're saying when you're saying that, oh, Alabama would have, Alabama could have, Ole Miss could have.
Right. All hypothetical.
You don't know. Sorry. Go ahead. You were saying?
So breaking down the reasons why this didn't go Indiana's way, not to twist the knife for you. I know you were there and this is important to you to see. Yeah. Listen, Cignetti talked a big game coming into this, saying we beat the S out of top 25 teams while completely inaccurate. He was coming out swinging, and a lot of criticism on Cignetti considering the 20-3 score and punting from about midfield. Why not be more aggressive? And he talked about it after the game. He was like, he just didn't feel like the offense was going to be able to do anything. And he saw at least some fight in his defense. So this just felt like from the get-go, Notre Dame was the better team, period. What did you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to argue that. I think, again, this also comes down to some missed opportunities. Indiana goes 3 and out. It didn't look great on that first possession. Curtis Rourke was off. And then they come out and D'Angelo Pons, the cornerback, has this terrific interception off a deflection on a Riley Leonard pass. And now you're like, okay, defense steps up, kind of in the way they did against Washington. Pons picks off a pass, and it really kind of opened things up for Indiana in that game. And look, you go down, Elijah Surratt makes a great play, great catch. And then on first down, they went tempo, and it felt like they were rushing to get to the line of scrimmage and get a playoff. And then it felt like Curtis Rourke was sped up too, because it's first down and he throws a ball he didn't need to throw down near the goal line, and it gets picked off. I Bleav it was Xavier Watts that came up with it. And now you're like, air's out of the building. Or I mean, it was a home game, but you know what
Yeah,
I mean. Like,
yeah.
the air's out of the sidelines for Indiana, but you got them on the 1 yard line, so you're like, all right, maybe defense can make a stand here, and then bam, Love breaks off the 98-yard touchdown run. You're like, whoa, that is, now you're talking about a 14-point swing. If you were thinking Indiana could go in there and take the early lead 7-0, and then Notre Dame comes down and they put the 7 on the board there. They go up to a 14-0 early lead. And that was the script that Indiana needed to take. They needed to take the early lead to force Notre Dame to throw the ball. Now, I will say I thought that Riley Leonard played one of his best games as a passer.
Certainly
And
did.
wasn't asked to do a ton and got bailed out a couple of times by some terrific catches by Jordan Faison. Like that dude was a big-time player that kind of went underappreciated and overlooked, I think, in the grand landscape of that game. But look, when it comes down to it, Indiana got pushed around up front, especially on the offensive side of the ball and especially on first down. So, Tom, as you know, and for our listeners who may not, being on schedule when you are an offense means you're gaining 4 yards on first down and 4 yards on second down. And then 3rd and 2, you continue and you're staying on schedule. And that allows you to then move the sticks and keep kind of working your way down the field. Indiana, before the end of game sequence, where they scored 2 touchdowns late, had one play that went 4 yards or more on first down. One play. And a vast majority of them were negative plays, -3, -4, -1. And when you set yourself up that way in 2nd and 11 and 2nd and 14 against a really good team and a good defense there, you are setting yourself up to fail. They had a hard time converting on so many of those possessions and so many of those because they started way behind the sticks on first down. And that is just on the road in an atmosphere like that against a team like that, you just can't do it. And ultimately they couldn't. And so they had to resort to the RPO game, and the back shoulder fades were not working in this game. And when you aren't able to run the ball consistently, quarterback's not having his best day. It's just, it was not a recipe for success offensively. I thought defense held their own outside of the explosive 98-yard run, and gave them a shot, especially coming into the side after that block punt or a block field goal. You're like, okay, you got a shot here. And then that's where you saw the punt with just over, I think, 10 minutes left in the game. And you're like, that's a tough one to swallow. And so, yeah, I would have the conservatism on some of those plays and some of those decisions did surprise me. But, ultimately, it just didn't go Indiana's way for a lot of those reasons.
Indiana 4 of 12 on 3rd down. Notre Dame nearly 400 yards of offense. Great balance for the Irish. Roughly 200 yards passing, roughly 200 yards rushing. 5.5 yards per carry. It's the most boring thing to say in football, but this time of year, especially outdoors, but this time late in the year when you've had bumps and bruises to your roster, the teams that can run the ball well and play very good defense are going to win. And that's exactly what Notre Dame did. That's what they've done for most of the season. Hats off to Indiana, what they were able to do this year and changing the narrative about what this program is, not just a basketball school, but being legitimately in the conversation of attempting to win and win at a high level. I think is good for the sport. It's good for the Big Ten. My hat's off to the Hoosiers. I do feel bad for them in this circumstance. So that's Notre Dame and Indiana. Moving on to Saturday, the noon game was Penn State hosting SMU. This was a blowout. This was exactly what everybody was hoping to avoid in the first round. And I understand people's comments about blowouts, but Penn State handled this from the very beginning. It looked like Penn State's offense was going to have to do next to nothing because Penn State's defense was just coming up with pick sixes for most of the first half, to the point that it was like Tom Allen got all the praise after the game from Andy Kotelnicki and James Franklin. Franklin, who is now won 100 games as the head coach at Penn State, so quite the accomplishment to do that in 10 seasons.
Nice way to get to 100.
Not too bad. Not too bad. Always want to know. So SMU, man, you and I talked about it a little bit coming into this game. They felt like Oregon light, and it felt like light, unfortunately, and that Kevin Jennings never looked comfortable. That is a tissue paper thin offensive line, offensive tackles that never were going to be able to hang with Abdul Carter, for instance, Denai Dennis Sutton, a very talented defensive line for Penn State. And the rest of Penn State's defense was just able to take advantage of that chaos. Kevin Jennings dropping back and running for his life most of the time, throwing errant passes. He is unfortunately a bit inaccurate with the football, and that really cost them. No real athletes at wide receiver that were scaring Penn State's defensive backs. And I wouldn't necessarily say that Penn State has the best secondary in the country, but they certainly are a good one. So that was very eye-opening. Credit to SMU's defensive line. I think they have a lot of ability, but outside of that, Penn State was able to do whatever they really wanted to do in terms of committing to run the football. Again, just like I said about Notre Dame, Indiana, Drew Aller didn't have to have his best game. He didn't necessarily, but Andy Kotelnicki committed to running the football from the very beginning and playing outstanding defense. It was 38-10 only because of a late touchdown and mop-up duty. This felt like a lot bigger of a divide than that. When you saw this game, once you got to watch back clips of it or get to see the whole game entirely, how'd you feel?
Yeah, I mean, this felt like it was an absolutely dominant defensive effort, and it almost didn't matter what Penn State's offense looked like. Like we don't even really have to talk about it because there was just no way that SMU was going to put up enough points to win this game based off the way that Penn State's defense was playing. And I think, I love moments like this where in a big spot, you see a guy like Dom DeLuca come up with two interceptions in this game, one of which he did return for a touchdown. I love seeing that. The guy was a former walk-on, right?
Yes, sir.
And I loved seeing this for Tom Allen. Like, again, I have an affinity for him based off what he did at Indiana. And I knew and still know that he is a terrific defensive mind. And with the players that he has at his disposal on that Penn State defensive side of the ball, man, that was a match made in heaven from the start. And I get it. They gave up a bunch of points and yards to Oregon. But man, in this game, like SMU, as you said, like they can put up points and they can run up and down the field similar to Oregon, different team, certainly. But Penn State was so up to the challenge in this game. Denai Dennis Sutton, again, needs more credit for what he's done. And what he's done really the last 2 years, when you include this one. There's just so many ways that Penn State can get after you in this, this type of game against a team like that. Man, they were overmatched when those two units were on the ball. And then look, SMU just, they couldn't stop the run they needed to in order to get the ball back to their offense to give them more opportunities to figure out what Penn State was doing to them. And Jennings, as you said, was just lost. So, yeah, game ball goes to Tom Allen in that defense for coming up with that game plan and then executing it that way, Tom.
Yeah, very impressive effort. The runners up in the ACC, I know a lot of people were poking fun at Clemson for their performance against Texas, and we won't cover that on this show because it's the Big Ten, but still, Texas, better personnel, better defense. They made Kate Klubnik's life very, very difficult. So rough outing for the ACC there in the first round. I do want to get to the SEC's performance in the first round because, listen, I was very impressed by Tennessee's showing in terms of their fan base at the Horseshoe. About 40.
Does that win you the game, though?
It didn't, unfortunately. It did that was a rough game, and it felt like all the things Ohio State needed to do to get the specter of the Michigan loss off of their back, they did tenfold. What did you think?
Tom, they did exactly what we talked about on this show for the last 2 weeks. Ohio State needed to do to win this game. They needed to use their passing game. Will Howard had to be excellent. He had to play his best game as a Buckeye. Bleav he did. 24, 29, 311. Yeah, he had a pick, whatever. Two touchdowns.
Not bad.
Jeremiah Smith was a star in this game with 2 touchdowns, and it started from the jump. They scored the first 21 points of the game in the first 15 minutes of the game. That crowd then lit up, right? It lit up. And so 42-17, when it was all said and done, it was never close. I know they scored 10 points in the second quarter, but then Ohio State comes back out and leaves no doubt by the end of the third. And it was 35-10 at the end of the third quarter. And there wasn't anything Tennessee could do about it. Nico Iam. Let's say it with me now. Nico Iamaleava.
Yeah.
There it is. Goodness. Just, it was not up to the challenge in this game.
No.
certainly not through the air. So they had to resort to running him 20 times in this game to find any sort of offense. Scored a couple of touchdowns on the ground, but it was far too little to deal with what Ohio State was throwing at him.
It was interesting to watch this game because you and I have talked about it so much, is that like had Ryan Day and Ohio State lost this game, I think he's out. But it's this weird element that you still saw what Ohio State was during the regular season. If you omit that Michigan game, for instance,
Yeah.
you still see a team credibly capable of winning the national championship. And now that we have some of the early lines, courtesy of our friends at Bet Online, Ohio State is now got the second best odds to win the national championship. Oddly enough, to Texas at 3-1, Ohio State 7-2, Oregon 4-1, Penn State 5-1, and then so on and so forth from there. But that just kind of give you an idea. Do you feel that strongly about Ohio State being able to win it all?
Yes, absolutely. When you see them put up this kind of performance against a team like Tennessee, with the athletes that really both squads have, but when you see what this star power can do, like, yeah, absolutely. That's why we said from the jump before the season started that Ohio State was a favorite to win the national title.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had to show it. They just had to get out there and prove it. And finally, like 13 games into the season, they did. And I was happy to see that. I was happy to see this kind of performance for Ryan Day. I mean, that group and that staff obviously worked their butts off, each and every week to game plan. And it helps when you have the nation's, so many of the nation's best players at their position. But they ran the ball too. Now let's not forget about that.
Mm-hmm.
Travion Henderson, had a terrific performance with 2 touchdowns. They've got so much for you to deal with. And when they have it all going, ain't much you can do. So Ohio State, emphatic win. And I think now you look at them and you go, whoa, okay, there's the team we thought could win the national title.
Outside of the offense, like Judkins and Henderson, 4 touchdowns between them, and then you get another 2 from Jeremiah Smith. Like you just rolled this team. Let's not gloss over the defensive performance from Ohio State. Tui Maloau and Sawyer played like possessed men. It was really
4 sacks between them, or 3.5. Yeah.
But it was incredible to see over the last few years how Jim Knowles has really changed that defense. And there was so much conversation, I think, going into the Michigan game of, okay, Ryan Day wants to prove that identity, that they're more physical and they're tougher. They've accomplished that on the defensive side of the ball. And it's okay that you aren't that on offense. You know what I mean? Like if you want to be Michigan, where you're playing leather helmet, service academy style football, and you're just running the crap out of the ball up the A gap, it's like, cool, knock yourself out. You can do that.
Right.
But you've got all these athletes at every different position. You can kill them in so many different ways offensively. But defensively is where they have that hard-nosed edge. And I think, again, like I was saying before, this time of year when guys are banged up, it's nasty outside in Columbus, for instance. It's going to be better conditions once they play at the Rose Bowl, obviously. It matters that you have a defense that wants to hit you in the mouth, and they were motivated, period.
No question. And look, there's some absolute dudes on that defense. And I'm really excited to see what they're going to do now in an encore against Oregon. Like, I feel like this is just what the doctor ordered for Ohio State from a confidence perspective. And now looking at this thing, I'm like, okay, Oregon's sitting back like, okay, all right. Now we're going to get their best shot here. They are playing their best football when it matters the most. We have got to be at our best, and our best from the jump, and for 60 minutes to go out and win this game in the Rose Bowl. I cannot wait. I'm going to be there at the Rose Bowl on New Year's Day.
Oh, that's an easy commute for you too. Oh, I'm so jealous of you.
Let's go.
So the quarterfinal matchups on New Year's Day: Notre Dame versus Georgia. That's in Louisiana. In New Orleans, Penn State versus Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl in Glendale, Arizona. That's on New Year's Eve. Then on New Year's Day, it's Oregon versus Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, Pasadena. And then outside of our purview in the Big Ten, it's the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, Georgia. Arizona State up against Texas. Can Cam Scattaboo run all over the Longhorns? We're going to find out. But we will look ahead at that later on this week here on Bleav in Big Ten. Happy holidays, everybody. Happy New Year. Enjoy this with your families as much as possible. And then once you come up for air, throw on Bleav in Big Ten, and we'll get you ready for the rest of the college football playoff quarterfinals.